Welcome back to Gŵyl Festival Day 6. I have a full programming for today, so I'm just going to launch straight in. First up, we have Chrissey Worrall, who's a kids bookseller at Waterstones, an expert kids bookseller at Waterstones, might I add. She talks us through, so we talk a little bit about books she liked growing up, what she does at her day job, but we literally go through the kids section, picture books, 5 to 8, 9 to 12, YA, so would highly recommend, not just for people who have kids to buy for or go to the libraries for, but for people who are just looking for light reading, for some beautiful artwork in the picture books, for just a fun way to spend an hour or two. I love kids books, huge reader of kids books. A couple of children's books to show for you is The Rainbow Fish, which it was originally written in Swiss German. Highly recommend. And then You Can't Be Too Careful, which I would especially recommend for these times. It is a wonderful story of social responsibility, and if you'd like to teach those socialist morals early, this is the one to go for. It's really good. It's about consequences, so how everybody in society is connected, and how I'll read this book. So after Chrissy, we move on to Polly Barton, who is the translator of Where the Wild Ladies Are. The book is written by Aiko, who I know is watching, so hello. It's a wonderful, delightful book. It's feminist retellings of ghost stories, but not in a Angela Carter dark fairy tale style, more in a recentering of the women, and I'll let Polly explain. After Polly, we have an evening of Japanese music by Lawrence Werner, and we did it specifically to tie in with Where the Wild Ladies Are, and I loved this evening. It was so beautiful, so much more than I could have imagined, and it was really special. So I hope that today you will, after watching Chrissy, watch both Polly and Lawrence's radio show together. They're something special. Hello and welcome back to another evening at Gŵyl, the book festival in translation. I am very privileged to have with me tonight Chrissey Worrall, who is an expert children's bookseller at Waterstones. Hi, Chrissy.
Hi.
How are you? How are you?
I'm good. Oh, is it lagging?
No, we just did it. It was just I said, how are you? And don't worry.
That's fine.
Actually I just wanted, so I am not an expert on children's books in any way, shape or form, and I think that it's really important, obviously as part of translated fiction, to really focus on children's books, and it's something I really wanted to do, so I brought in Chrissy, who can do much better than I can.
I can try.
Do you want to talk a little bit about where you work and what you do on a day-to-day basis that's non-lockdown related?
Yeah, of course. So I'm an expert kids bookseller. I run the kids section in quite a big store in Leeds. It's wonderful. So kind of day to day, I'm being a shop assistant, and then I'm also kind of working out what we're going to do next in the kids section in terms of like new releases, what we want to promote. We always pick like a couple of titles, I think 3 across the board, plus obviously the children's book of the month to champion, and we've been kind of getting really good with kind of picking more non-mainstream titles, because I'm not always the one that's picking them, so it's really encouraging to see. So we pick a kind of a younger one for the picture books, a 5 to 8, and then we kind of have an on-off teen one. We usually just kind of pick one halfway through the month that we kind of want to champion and run with it when we find something we're really, really passionate about. But I also do a lot of the kids events, which is really lovely and really rewarding. So that's things like the weekly story times, which are just gorgeous. the author signings, which are a lot of work and a lot of kind of more character-based storytelling. So like we'll get like the Gruffalo in, or like Mog the cat, things like that. Absolutely gorgeous. And I'm also trying to start a teen book club, but that can be quite tricky. So yeah, it's really good. I also kind of support the wider events stuff, so I get a lot of that kind of side of it.
Absolutely. And you're also very privileged to have a Chris Riddell original drawing on the side of your kids' book.
I was privileged enough to watch that in action, and I have an Instagram video of it. It was so nice.
Anyone doesn't follow him on Instagram, like, go find him. It will be your new favourite account. So where did you want to begin with children's books and translation?
Well, I've got a couple of things that I kind of noticed when I was a kid, so let's kind of start there. So one of my all-time favourite authors was Cornelia Funk, and I apologise in advance for all of the like wrong mispronunciations that I'm going to do, because there are just too many to look them all up. I imagine you have this problem all the time, and I feel so guilty about it, but I'm going to try my best, and let's hope. So obviously Inkheart is her most famous. It's a series, it's absolutely gorgeous, and like she kind of got me into translated fiction at a very early age. At the point that I picked them up, I really didn't know that it was translated. Whoever translated it did a really brilliant job on it, as everyone does when they translate books. And it was just such a brilliant story, and to have that kind of translated over and have the same feel just really inspired me, like from a very rudimentary point, at the thought that like there's this whole world of books that's not just kind of English language, or like US, British, Australian experiences, but obviously it really varies depending on like where the author is from and kind of what background they're from, even if it is English language. But it's really nice to have that kind of extra, I don't know, kind of, it makes it feel a bit more universal. And it just really kind of caught my attention. So I think that's kind of what introduced me to translated fiction. She's got a few other works which are also just absolutely wonderful. The Thief Lord, and her newest series is the Dragon Rider series, and the second one of that came out in the UK 2 years ago, I believe.
Yeah, I love first.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And so that means that kind of now I'm more kind of in touch with translated fiction from that point onwards, and as an adult I read so much translated fiction. I always look for it because I know there's going to be something that's just a little bit different in terms of maybe the tone or in terms of the situations that goes into that novel, and it's really nice to have that kind of variance. My usual example is things like The Convenience Store Woman, a lot of kind of Korean and Japanese and Chinese literature that is really brilliant and across the spectrum, totally different from each other.
So after Cornelia Funk, who else did you end up reading and loving as a child?
Well, there were so many things. So I learned French as a kid, so I picked up a lot of French authors, even if it was translated into English. So The Little Prince is obviously like a classic, absolutely wonderful. But after that, I kind of had a look into kind of what was translated and what wasn't, because I'm a complete geek and love just any kind of history of things and stuff like that. And there's so many translated kind of picture books and younger kids books. As a kind of older child, I didn't really engage with much more. It more came out in kind of like my adult reading. But in terms of kind of book selling, there's just been so much more recently that kind of really, it's beautiful to see, because we're not just leaning on kind of the classics of Pinocchio and Swiss Family Robinson, Imola Detectives, that kind of thing. So it's really nice to see that there's kind of more coming through now.
Yeah. Are there any in particular that have caught your attention?
So recently there was a book called The Murderer's Ape. I don't know if you've heard of it.
No.
It's by a guy called, I think it's Jakob Frigelius. That is probably a terrible pronunciation, but it's really wonderful. It's kind of an older, probably about 11 plus because it's quite long, and it's about this this monkey who can be understood by her friend, and it's just so like personable and beautiful, and you immediately believe that this creature is human because of the amount of intelligence that she has. And it's a beautiful story. It's kind of like a murder mystery, which is always a winner in my mind. So yeah, that's beautiful. And there's a couple of like French ones that come out recently. So there's A Winter's Promise, which is very very Chris Riddell, actually. The illustration, I can't remember who it's by, unfortunately. It's a French illustrator, and it's just absolutely wonderful. It's very kind of Chris Riddell, spidery, gothic, and beautiful. And that's written by Christelle LeBoss. It's called The Mirror Visitors Quartet, and it's wonderful fantasy.
Oh, that sounds excellent. And there's something about I feel like fantasy still now feels like a similar role as sort of like as romance can do in people's lives, in that they are such immersive experiences. Obviously they're very different, but they're just wonderful page turners.
Yeah, and they really kind of take you out of your own world, and it's just, I mean, literally, figuratively, all of those things. So it's really beautiful. Yeah.
Are there any other books you wanted to mention in particular?
I mean, the obvious is The Moomins.
Yeah.
I just love them. They're wonderful. My mum introduced me to them when I was very young, and I got very scared of them. But since I've kind of come to love them a bit more, and just hearing about Tove Jansson's life is just an inspiration.
I have the Tove Jansson's Winter and Summer book here.
I really need to read those. I've only really read The Moomins, but
not children's, but if you're an adult. When I was looking at doing a sort of section on children's translated books for the chalkboards, there was one I was really surprised. Did you ever read The Rainbow Fish as a kid?
Yes, that's on my list right here.
So surprised to learn that. I never realised.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't until I started bookselling, I think, and then I got into all of the kind of little details of the books that I get quite obsessive about. And it was, everyone was surprised. There are a couple of other really beautiful picture books. So obviously Baba is one really good example. So that's a French author, Jean de Brunhoff. Absolutely gorgeous. I watched the videos when I was a kid and just fell in love with them. And then there's also The Story of the Mole. Ooh. So its full title is very long. It's The Story of the Mole Who Knew It Was None of His Business. It's by Werner Holzworth, and it's just the funniest, best thing ever. So it's about a mole who goes around with a poo on its head, and it's trying to find who did this poo. It's beautiful. Kids absolutely love it because, like, especially at that age, everyone loves anything to do with poo.
There are many, many children's picture books to do with poo.
There really are. But it's just a really gorgeous one. There have been some kind of newer, absolutely gorgeous picture books as well. So there's the Press Here books by Herve Tullet, and it's really simple. It's really bright pictures. There are only a couple of words, if that, to be honest, and it's just, it's a delight. So it's really worth having a look at that one, especially because it kind of translates into slightly older age brackets. It's really beautiful. There's also The Elephant's Umbrella, which is translated from Persian, I believe. I think Leila Jafari is Iranian, and that's just, it's very different in terms of illustration, and it's beautiful. Like, kids' picture books in the UK have a very kind of set type, I suppose, unless you're talking about the kind of Mac Barnett, John Clason kind of stuff, which is gorgeous and everyone needs to read. It's all very bright. It's all got kind of, I mean, it varies in words in terms of kind of the length, but they've mostly got a set length, a set kind of amount of pages, and a set design. And they are gorgeous, and there's loads of stuff that's absolutely brilliant that's come out of that. But it's really nice sometimes to get a bit of diversity in the illustration styles. and the elephant's umbrella is gorgeous. There isn't much in terms of kind of story, plot, kind of words on the page, but it is just wonderful for that age bracket. So we're talking probably like 4, 5, if that, so kind of not reading age. And yeah, it's an absolutely wonderful one. It came to my attention just because of the kind of difference in illustration. There's also the beautiful Inside the Villains, which is a French translation by someone called Clotilde Perrin. Have a look at it, it's gorgeous. It's this like big oversized gift picture book, which is all about like fairy tales, kind of Grimm style fairy tales. It's kind of dark illustration, and it's just absolutely wonderful. It's got a wolf on the front, and even that first illustration just really packs a punch. It's gorgeous.
Oh, I love picture books. Oh, I'm gonna be looking at that. Fantastic. When you were describing just because Iranian illustration, would you describe Persepolis as like a children's book? Because I think that like 12, 13 YA, maybe it would be really a good read.
Definitely. So it's quite often recommended for the kind of younger, the teen side of YA, just because of the kind of the stuff that it contains. It's an absolutely gorgeous book, but yeah, I would. I don't know what I was going to say after that.
Like it with like absolutely worth reading, but only if you're sort of, there are like some dark stuff
there really is, yeah, and it's absolutely kind of worth a read. A side note to that is, and it's not translated fiction, unfortunately, but I recently watched The Breadwinner. It's a gorgeously illustrated and animated story, but it actually comes from a book called The Breadwinner by someone called Deborah Ellis. She's Canadian, so it is English language, but it's absolutely beautiful. It's about a little girl who her father gets taken into custody, and the only people left in her family are her mother, her older sister, and her, and she has to kind of disguise herself as a boy so she can kind of get around and not be arrested. And yeah, it's really good,
isn't it? I think it's on my to watch list.
Definitely watch it. I mean, so I haven't watched all of it because we watched it during lockdown and I just couldn't. It made me too sad, so I'm going to go back and rewatch it when I'm feeling a bit more kind of hardy, I think. So it's a really good one to, even though it isn't sadly translated fiction.
It's definitely exposing other cultures, isn't it?
Definitely, yeah.
So moving on from sort of picture books to the 5 to 8 would be the next section, wouldn't it?
So there's a lot in terms of classics in this section, but not much in terms of kind of mainstream UK publishing that is that's newer, I think. I mean, the difficulty with this section is that it's such a small one in the first place, and it's only really recently that publishers have started putting time and money and effort into it. It used to just be things like the younger Enid Blytons and Pippi Longstocking, which I'll come on to later, and the Moomins and stuff like that. But it's really exploded in terms of UK publishing in general. But it also means that there's not too much new stuff, which I always try and find when I'm trying to do stuff like this, just because the classics are great, but we always want some new stuff, stuff that's either a bit more updated in terms of kind of diversity, maybe.
Ever's gonna have like Heidi on it, isn't it? Like
exactly. Yeah. So the main ones from here are kind of the Moomins and Pippi Longstocking. There's also recently been a series published by, I believe it's Pushkin Press, which is called the Detective Nosegoods series. It's 3 books about this detective who goes on lots of adventures. It's from Polish, which is actually relatively unusual in terms of mainstream publishing. They tend to focus more on kind of Western European stuff, so it's really nice to see. So short and sweet for that one, unfortunately.
That's all right. And as we move around the shop, where would we find ourselves next?
We'll find ourselves in the craft section, which is my personal favourite because there's so much stuff in here that is just absolutely gorgeous. The aforementioned ink art, wonderful. On the slightly higher end of that, so that can also be read by kind of younger teens, and I mean I still enjoy it as an adult, so yeah. There we go. But you've got, yeah, there's such a wealth. So previously mentioned, we've got A Meal on the Detectives, which is wonderful. Also The Parent Trap, which is a brilliant novel and everyone needs to read.
A novel? Is it related to the book, to the film?
Only like tangentially. That's beautiful. You've also got The Little Prince. I'd include that in that section. And then you've got beautiful things like The Never-Ending Story, beautiful classic. Then you've got The Song of Seven and A Letter from the King, which was just recently made into a film, actually. And that is from Dutch author. Can I even try this one?
Go for it.
I'm gonna say Tongtract. And this is very sad for me because I am part Dutch. There we go, let's skim over that one. And they're just wonderful adventure stories, fantasy based. And yeah, another like staunch kind of one that everyone needs to read essentially. It's always going to be in that section, and it's absolutely gorgeous. So yeah, that's it in terms of. I also forgot, obviously, Pinocchio, classic, and Swiss Family Robinson, which are Italian and German. Yeah, absolutely beautiful stories, classics. But now we move on to the best part, which is the more kind of updated ones. There's absolutely loads here, especially in the last kind of year. It's really, really exploded. I think, again, publishers have decided that it's off the back of the kind of popularity of people like Cornelia Funk. It's really worth investing time and money in translated fiction. So you've got wonderful things like The Raven's Children, which is Russian. It's by Yulia Yakovleva. And it's quite a like dark tale. It's beautiful. And it's quite small as well, so it's quite good for the age range because it grasps at quite good themes whilst also being not daunting in terms of size. Again, the aforementioned Murderer's Ape, again, absolutely beautiful. Most recent one that I've come across is called Lampy and the Children of the Sea, which I haven't read yet. It's on my kind of reading list because Robin Stevens recommended it. It's by Annette Schaap, and she's also Dutch, and it just looks like a really brilliant adventure story, kind of in the veins of kind of Robin Stevens and Enid Blyton and people like that. Just absolutely gorgeous. What else have we got? Oh yes, so there are some really brilliant new ones. As I was saying earlier, kind of a lot of, especially in this section, translated fiction comes from kind of Western Europe. That does extend slightly to Eastern Europe, but not much. But there have been some really brilliant things coming out of this boom in translated fiction, which then extends to kind of South America. Unfortunately, it's still from mostly white authors, but it's progressing. So there's My Sweet Orange Tree by Jose Mayuro de Vasconcelos, apologies, who is Brazilian, so it's from Portuguese. And it's a classic. It was published originally about 50 years ago, and Pushkin Press have just kind of picked it up in the last like 3 or 4 years. They're doing some really brilliant work with translated fiction, as mentioned, and they are kind of slowly moving more towards kind of non-European centric translations, which is just a treat. There are some really great outliers as well, called so things like The Distance Between Me and the Cherry Tree, which is actually Italian, but again, absolutely gorgeous. And yes, there's also A Good Day for Climbing Trees, which was originally published in Afrikaans. Again, still a white author, but kind of coming out of a more diverse kind of landscape, I suppose. And that's by Jaco Jacobs, I believe. Thank you. And he publishes pretty much exclusively in Afrikaans. And then again, I think it's been picked up by Pushkin and translated another that's a more modern classic, I think.
How exciting. Like, there are so many new recommendations there that I've never heard of. I'm so excited to get my teeth into them. Are we coming to the end, or are we?
There is a little bit more, actually.
A little bit more.
So older fiction in terms of kind of teen and YA has always been a little bit better. It hasn't really boomed like the rest of it has. It's kind of been an underlying, because a lot of it comes from kind of more age appropriate adult fiction. There's a lot more of kind of leeway in terms of like getting translated fiction from kind of the adult section and maybe kind of deciding that it's a bit more appropriate for that age range. So you've got stuff like The City of the Beasts by Isabel Allende. She's Chilean. It was written in Spanish originally. It's a classic. I think it might be one of the first kind of more adult reads that I read as a teenager. Her magical realism is just gorgeous, and it's a real one that I think everyone should read. In terms of kind of newer stuff, there's the aforementioned A Winter's Promise. That's absolutely gorgeous. The Red Abbey Chronicles by Maria Touch. Oh no. I went into that with such like enthusiasm and it went so badly wrong. Maria Tachaninoff, I believe, again apologies, who, from what I could find, I think she's Swedish. And the first in that series is called Maresi. They're absolutely gorgeous covers. They've got beautiful illustrations on the covers, and they're kind of feminist folklore. I think currently there's either 2 or 3 in that series, and they're just an absolute delight. They're gorgeous. There's also Piglets by Clément Beauvais, which is French. It's very YA, so I definitely avoid giving it to younger teens. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's really funny. Again, brilliant. The aforementioned Cornelia Funk also publishes in this age range.
Yeah.
So she has her Reckless series, which is a bit darker than The Thief Lord or Dragon Rider or even Inkheart, which is kind of the darkest of her younger books. I think there might be 4 of those, but don't quote me on that one. And they're just like they're gorgeously dark and beautiful, and her writing as ever is just wonderful. So there's also a couple of ones I wanted to highlight here. So I haven't read this, but The Wild Book by Juan Villoro. He's a Mexican author, and I think he's been publishing for quite a long time. So they're all written in Spanish. And have a look at the cover for this one because it's just absolutely gorgeous. It's on the younger end, so I could have kind of included it in with the 9-12 stuff, but I think it's just really worth kind of having a look at it for a little bit older readers as well. And there's also the Beast Player series. So it is the only one on my list that is Asian. Mm-hmm. So it's by a Japanese author called Nahoko Uehashi, and it's high fantasy. The second one is out this year and it's just gorgeous. The illustrations on the front are wonderful. I believe they've made an anime of it as well, but I haven't seen that. I really want to get my hands on it. But yeah, that's kind of, I think, the best of what I could find and what I could dredge up. It's just absolutely wonderful.
Oh, thank you so much. That was the best list ever.
If you want anything off my list, I will send it to you.
Oh, thank you, Chrissy. Thank you so much for helping us all out here, and I really enjoyed talking to you.
Oh, thank you so much. It was really fun.
Bye, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in to day 6. There's only 3 days left, and I can't quite believe it. Hello everybody, and welcome to Saturday evening at Gŵyl Festival. I hope you're all having a lovely day. With me tonight I have Polly Barton, who is a translator and currently based in, are you based in Bristol or London at the moment?
That's right, in Bristol, yeah.
Do you know, we're just across the border. I'm just in Chepstow, like literally across the bridge.
Oh wow, okay. I'll wave to you across the across the ocean.
So Polly translates from Japanese to English, and I found her through the book Where the Wild Ladies Are, and we want to talk a little bit about that. Also, hello Aiko, I know that you are hopefully watching, so hello, she wrote the book, in case anyone didn't catch her. I was just wondering a little bit about how you became a translator. So how did you start translating, and why literary fiction in particular, as opposed to audiovisual interpreting, all those kind of things?
Sure. Well, I guess the very first time I started translating was when I was working in a London-based publisher of kind of, it was mostly food-related texts, and I was asked to translate a food blog, and you know, that was back in the days when my Japanese really wasn't all that hot, but I think that even though I was kind of looking up every other word, I more or less immediately had the sense that this was something that kind of worked for me, that it was quite a good fit with my skill set, I guess. I've always been a very bookish person, and, you know, translating felt, the more I did it, the more I started to feel like it was a kind of a very deep way of reading, which really appealed. And then also getting to use like my English really felt good as well. In terms of interpreting, I feel like it's a very, very different skill set. And, you know, often when people are dealing with you as a translator, the assumption is like, if you can do one, then you can do the other. And you know, both interpreters and translators will tell you very with a lot of passion that that's not the case. You know, one of my most dreaded things is when I'm kind of suddenly called upon to like interpret, and I think as the years have gone on, I got slightly more confident with it, but you know, essentially I'm an introvert, and speaking is not my forte, as this is bearing witness to. So yeah, translating I feel a lot more at home with, I guess.
So I was wondering if you'd talk a little bit about Where the Wild Ladies Are and introduce it. I thought it was absolutely delightful and quite a surprise. So
thank you. So Where the Wild Ladies Are is a collection of contemporary feminist reimaginings of traditional Japanese ghost stories, which kind of have multiple sources. You know, some of them are kind of the kind of ghost stories that are essentially passed down as part of the culture. Other ones, and that everyone would know. Other ones are slightly less well known, and you know, appear in like kabuki or rakugo, which are kind of traditional Japanese storytelling forms. But one kind of very notable feature of the quintessential Japanese ghost story is that the ghost is always a woman, and the woman has become a ghost because they have some kind of grudge or grievance that they've been unable to leave behind, right? So they kind of come back to avenge the people who have wronged them. And so it's a very sort of sad picture, essentially, of a woman who's had a terrible lot in life, and she's come back, and you know, she's a real drag, and she's trying to kind of people would rather forget her, essentially, right? And Alco has told me in the past that she has this real fascination for ghosts, but not just for ghosts who are kind of scary and menacing, but more for ghosts that kind of just blend in very naturally with the people around them, and you know, where no one really kind of questions their presence. And so a lot of the ghosts in these stories are very much like that. They don't find it weird that they're around in the world, and occasionally, you know, some people do find it strange, but more often than not, they just kind of blend in, and notably they are a lot more sorted than most of the kind of human inhabitants of the world, I would say. You know, they have a lot to teach us, essentially.
Absolutely, I think it's a version of retelling ghost stories or horror stories or fairy tales in a feminist way that I've never come across before, because you sort of have your Angela Carters and like, I love them, they're amazing, but this is something really new. They're quite interlinked stories, so I didn't read them originally in chronological order, so it took me a bit longer than I think other people to realize that there were characters who were reoccurring and that there was a theme. And I was wondering, how was that to translate? Did you sort of do it to the same extent? Is it the same thing in the Japanese, or like, did you have to sort of change that at all?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much as it is in the Japanese. I think in the English edition, the order is very slightly changed. The order of the story is very slightly changed. And when we were reordering, then we had to be very careful that that wasn't disrupted, because I think one of the joys for me about this collection actually was that they are interlinked, but not in a very obvious way, even if you are reading them in the kind of the prescribed order. And so I remember too, as well, the first time I read it, like kind of thinking, huh, I remember that name, like, and then kind of gradually it starts to all fall into place. But that too feels, if not kind of ghostly, at least a little bit, you know, it contributes to this sense that is going on throughout the book, I think, of like never quite being on a firm footing with what is going on, right? So yeah, that felt like an important feature to me too. I'm glad that you appreciated that.
How did you come to work with Aiko? Have you worked with her before, or was this a new, did you pitch the book, or did the publisher come to you asking for translation?
So it's been a kind of long and quite, not, I wouldn't say convoluted, but certainly not straightforward path. I mean, I knew of Alco's, I've known of Alco's work for a long time, but the first time that we ever worked together, I was about to say, although at that time we hadn't met, the first work that I ever translated by her was a short story in that collection called Smartening Up. And I was asked to translate that for the Granta Japan edition that came out. I can't remember when it was issue. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, 2005 maybe. And at that time, Where the Wild Ladies didn't exist as a collection, and I had no idea that this was going to become that. I don't know if Alco had an idea at that stage. Anyway, I translated it and it went online for Granta, and I loved it so much that I sort of started investigating other Alco's work and sort of reaching out to her. So I translated a few other stories by her, and then at that, kind of quite coincidentally, me and her both ended up doing a residency at the same time in Norwich, where we kind of got a lot closer. And it was around that time that we met up with Deborah Smith from Tilted Axis, and we kind of came up with a plan, the three of us, to do something. And that's, you know, that's finally the fruition of that.
Have you translated, so just a little bit about Tilted Axis, they're wonderful publishers, And Deborah Smith is actually the translator of The Vegetarian by Han Kang, which is a Korean book, which I'm sure most people will have heard of. And have you worked for Tilted Access? So they exclusively publish Asian literature, and there's a really good, I don't have it in my room at the moment, but there's a lovely poetry book I love, the Meets Bacchus one.
Yes, that's
So,
fantastic. That's really, really great.
Sergius Meets Bacchus, that's it. But anyway, sorry, have you worked with Deborah before, and are you going to do it for translators other than Alco, or are you just going to stick with?
I have not worked with Deborah before, and actually, so Where the Wild Ladies Are is only the second book in Japanese that they have published. The first one being Tokyo Ueno Station by Morgan, translated by Morgan Giles, written by Yu Miri, which is also fantastic. But so yes, so no, that was my first time to work with Tilted Axis, and I don't really know what the future is going to hold for that for us. But yes, hopefully at some point I will translate for them again.
Fantastic. Do you want to add anything else about Where the Wild Ladies Are? Like, how was your translation process working on it? Even though you did each story sort of over time.
I mean, just really fun, I would say. Like, you know, I think something that I worry about when I tell people that it's feminist retellings of ghost stories is that doesn't quite convey how much of a joy those stories are to read. And you know, I think particularly in Japan, where feminism can have quite a kind of academic ring to it and have quite a bad rap, you know, a lot of Aoko's project, I think, I don't want to speak too much for her, but I think a lot of her sort of drive as a novelist is to present kind of ideas in a way that are just really, really enjoyable to read for people of all kind of backgrounds and generations and so on and so forth. And, you know, because they're really fun to read, they are inevitably really fun to translate. Sometimes quite challenging, but yeah, no, it was really good.
Fantastic. How did translating this book compare to other works you translated? So you've translated a novel called Spring Garden,
yes.
And I was wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit about that as well.
So Spring Garden is one of 6 novellas that are published by Pushkin Press in their series of Japanese novellas. And it's a book by Tomoka Shibasaki. That was, I guess, the first full-length book that I worked on. And that was a really wonderful experience. It's an extremely atmospheric book, and it kind of, for me, it has a lot of the feeling of a kind of mystery, although actually nothing very dramatic really happens, and yet you're kind of, there's a really wonderful attention to detail, which I loved. And you know, it was an extremely different thing from translating Aoko. I mean, I think for me, so much of translation, what makes a good translation, what I strive to do in my translations is really to kind of capture a voice and to, you know, learn to inhabit that. And that's a lot what the first draft is about kind of finding that voice. And I think, you know, I think my work would be quite boring if I did the same, if I could use the same voice each time. So it's nice to have, it's really great for me to have different, very different works.
Absolutely. Are you working on anything new at the moment? So
I have a book coming out with Bloomsbury in November, which is called There's No Such Thing as an Easy Job. by an author called Kikuko Tsumura. And that, again, is totally different. Really, really quite weird and wonderful. It's all about the world of work, which is not something that I've kind of really translated through before. And yeah, that was also a joy.
Oh, fantastic. I was going to ask about what was my question to do with that? I just thought of it. Oh no, it's gone.
It's okay.
It's gone. It'll come back. Is your process different depending on so like you say with the world of work, there's not a subject almost that you translated around before. Does that mean that your process of translating was quite different from start to finish?
I mean, the process always feels quite different. But maybe it's not the process, and maybe it's more just like the headspace. I mean, I think my process is relatively similar. Most times I translate, which is to go through and produce a hideously rough draft. Like really, almost incomprehensible to anyone else, but somehow kind of doing that almost as fast as I'm reading it. And that somehow, for me, helps to preserve the momentum and the pace of the original text. And then I come back to that and go much, much slower then, and kind of resolve, and that just goes on until it's complete. I mean, I think, with the Bloomsbury book, the Jobs book, I had already produced. I pitched that one, so I'd had to work on a sample before, which was one of the 5 chapters, and that was a kind of interesting experience as well. Just polishing one part of it. And so what that meant was that when I came back to it and knew that I was going to be translating the whole thing, I had a kind of model now for the voice that I wanted to kind of use throughout, and that was instructive.
That's really interesting to learn, actually, because it's such a different experience, I think, producing samples. I remembered my question, and it was that I find it quite interesting that you, am I right in saying that you didn't learn Japanese until you were already an adult? Because and so I was wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit about that, because I think sometimes it can be sort of the impression that like it's too late. Like if you don't know a language and didn't do it at uni, that it's too late.
Totally, yeah. It's funny for me because I really, really, really never thought that this was the way my life would turn out, or that I would be thought of as a linguist. Like I still don't. That term still fits very strangely with me, even though ostensibly that is what I do, I guess. I mean, I don't really think it's ever too late to do anything, but I agree with you. Certainly with languages, there are, that there is this sense that, there have been times when I thought, well, if you haven't grown up with it, then you can't do it. And certainly if you haven't started learning at a relatively young age. But I think actually within the world of Japanese translation, particularly, there are a good few people who have come to it quite late in life for whatever reason. So yeah, it is possible. If there's anyone watching this who's in doubt, it's definitely possible.
That's really good advice. Thank you. That's come to like the end of the questions I'd pre-prepared, but I would like to reiterate that this is a delightful book and that everyone should be buying it. And I was wondering if there was anything else you wanted to add about Japanese translation in particular. Is there, do you because I've noticed that I definitely have more Japanese books in translation than I think I have any other country's books in translation. And I don't know if that was because I came across Kitchen by Banana Yoshimoto and was like, oh, come. But I was also wondering if that's because there's a particular link, or they've just sort of been successful and therefore you've had a little bit more, or am I completely wrong?
I mean, I sort of feel like Japanese culture obviously is very popular in the UK, and that's been the case for a long time. But I think with the kind of fiction that makes it onto people's bookshelves for a long time, you know, it's been very, very dominated by Murakami, and then also by Yoshimoto, and maybe a couple of other names. And I think that and I think now we are actually having a bit of a moment of like people waking up, the publishing industry waking up to the diversity of voices out there. I mean, I would say particularly voices of women writers, but not just, you know, just a real sense of the heterogeneity out there, you know, that like
If you had to recommend some other books for people to find, what would you recommend?
I am a big Yoko Ogawa fan. She writes a really mean short story. I would say the Diving Pool and Other Stories is always a hot recommendation of mine. There's also a translator called Lucy North has translated a book called Toddlers Hunting and Other Stories, which has just been reissued by New Directions, and that's really great. It's slightly older, but it's a really wonderful collection as well. There's so much. Tokyo Ueno Station, also from Totobatsu Press, is a big, watch it.
Fantastic. Wow. Thank you so much. And
something that I wanted to say before we end is just thank you so much for your wonderful illustration of for the cover. So you produced this beautiful illustration with Himeji Castle, which is featured in one of the stories, and both me and Alko were kind of enraptured when we saw it. So thank you.
Oh, not at all. I actually had to redo it. I don't know if I think you might have seen the first one too. Anyway, Himeji Castle was tiny because I'd sort of been going more off this front cover.
Right.
And Himeji Castle was like this big, and then I redid it, and Himeji Castle was like this big. Thank you. I really appreciate that. I'm glad you liked it.
Sorry, I'm switching over to interviewing you now, but how did the idea come about?
So I did last year when I was working at the Edinburgh Book Festival. Somebody just gave me a chalkboard and was like, "Would you like just write a sign sort of to put on a table for it?" And then I was like, I'd seen, because I'd been at Hay, they have this like long tradition of doing sort of chalkboard like competitions between the stewarding staff who run each festival tent. So they always try and outdo each other with like the most beautiful chalkboard saying what's going on in the tent at the moment. So I'd seen this and was like, right, we can do this here too. So that's how I started doing them, and they just kind of snowballed last year at the festival, and I did sort of quite a lot, like 60 or so. And so then it came around to this year, and I was expecting to do the same, and was hoping to sort of, because getting paid to paint, like ridiculous.
Yeah.
best. So I'd expected to do the same, but then obviously the festival got called off, and Hay Festival got called off. So I was sat at home, like at my mum's house, like, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
And I just started doing the Boardless Book Club, and so just was like, oh well, I could do chalkboards for these people, and then sort of that snowballed into like doing chalkboards for sort of novellas or novels, and like each week I was doing like a different chalkboard recommends, and that was translated. So yeah, so it was just part of that. Yeah.
They're lovely. It's such a, and it's like, I don't know, it feels like such a nice record as well of your reading experience, I guess. Decorate a whole house with them.
Thank you. Well, if you want, I can like send you that chalkboard if you want. I go like.
You must keep it as part of your archive.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So there we are. I got interviewed at the end. So thank you so much, Polly. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
And bye, everybody. We have a wonderful 3 days left of programming, including my mum, and including, of course, the wonderful Jinran and Carolina from Charcoal Press. So I hope you'll join us for the last 3 days, and thank you so much for paying attention today. Next up is Lawrence's evening of Japanese music for the book Where the Wild Ladies Are. I hope you will listen to that, because it's a real treat on the ears.